Welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. I'm Douglas Peak, and I am your Salty Pastor. I'm here to help coach you in your faith, and I want to be an encouragement. I want to be somebody that helps inspire you. I want to be someone that comes alongside you along your spiritual journey. If you're a person who's a part of a church and you feel really great in that community, I want to help you, from the sidelines. I really want you to look to the pastor of that church and the leadership of that church as the people who've been entrusted with the stewardship of your soul. Now, that doesn't mean they're 100% responsible for it, because in the end, it's your journey of faith. You need to walk it, and you need to do the work. But my point that I want to make here is pretty clear, and that is, I don't want to supplant them. And so I want you to look to them as your primary source. And if I can come along and add to that, awesome. But then there's a whole group of people that I've really become much more aware of over the past couple of years. 1 year in particular, since I left the full-time ministry as a pastor just over a year ago and retired, is that there is a lot of people out there that don't have a local church where they feel really connected. Now, they'll go to church maybe once in a while. They'll try different churches, but they are not what I would say connected, and I use that term intentionally, to that body, right? That local brand, that local manifestation of the Big C church. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this. Lots of reasons why people are going through this. One of those reasons could easily be that they don't see that the church brand is that interested in growing them in a way that they need to grow spiritually. Another option might be is that they've had a bad church experience, right? Number 3, it might be that they know that it is a brand and they're looking for something deeper and meatier. And unfortunately, that is hard to find in a lot of churches today in America. And so there's a lot of reasons why there's a large group of people out there that don't have a deep connection to a local church body. And in those situations, if you need a pastor, I want to be that pastor. I don't want to be the pastor that supplants the pastor that you have. But if you don't have a pastor, I want to be able to provide the shepherding that you might need, the encouragement, the discipleship. So if you don't have a local church, but you listen to the Salty Pastor, or you've been listening to the Salty Pastor, you're a new listener, and you don't have a local church, then send me an email at saltypastor@gmail.com. And that is a way to get started, because I want to know who's listening, and I want to know how I can encourage you in your faith, and if you need a pastor, how I could possibly provide that for you, even if it's in a transition period between churches or not. I want to be able to supply that. Now, one of the things we do here when we coach you up in your faith is we talk a lot about current events, and we've been focusing a lot about there's a lot of ideologies that you have to be aware of, and I think it's really important to understand that the New Testament talks a lot about it. Now, if you're familiar with your Bible, the New Testament has 27 different books, and the word Bible simply means library. So the New Testament is a library of books. The first 4 books in the library are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are biographies on the life of Jesus. Mark is the shortest. Matthew is written to Jews, and so it's really nerdy about how it's written and how it relates to the Old Testament. It's a fascinating thing. Luke was a doctor, and he was not an original apostle. He was a contemporary of Paul. And what he did is he was a historian, and so he is the most chronological laid out, and his is based upon eyewitness testimony. So a lot of like, well, when what happened and how it happened and so forth, you go to Luke, and Luke is a very long, probably the longest. And then finally there's John, and John was written the latest, but it was written by the Apostle John, who was the youngest apostle when he wrote his biography. And his is very unique. And what we mean by that in a scholarly sense is that it's peculiar. In other words, a whole bunch, 80, 90% of what you read in the gospel according to John is different than what you will read. It's not contradictory, it's in addition to. And so it's really quite fascinating in that regard. And then you have a book of history, which is called the Acts According to the Apostles. And in that, it covers a 30-year period, and it talks about all the different churches and how the gospel spread. Then what you find is the rest of the books, until you get to the book of Revelation, are letters written to different churches that were planted in the book of Acts. So the great thing about the letters is that what they do is they show us how the first century church really experienced the risen Jesus in their lives and how they responded to it in a positive way, in a negative way, in a good way, in a bad way. And so what we see is a lot of correction in these letters. But the thing that they are always correcting, right, is teaching, okay? And that is the actual truth that's being proclaimed. And I think it's really important because if you go to the first letter that the Apostle John wrote, he said something very interesting in chapter 4, verse 1. He said, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit." And what happens here, scholars interpret this by using a small letter. They don't use a capital S, because what they believe through the context that he's specifically talking about teachings. These spirits are teachings, is that he's discussing, okay? He says, don't believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. And every spirit that does not confess that Jesus is not from God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, of which you have heard that it is coming, and now it is already in the world. And he's writing this specifically, and scholars know this, we know this, to refute Gnosticism, because Gnosticism, first there was the Judaizers, the first century church had to deal with that. Then Gnostics came along. And what Gnostics did is they took the terminology of Christianity and then they reinterpreted it. And one of the things they did is that they said that Jesus was not God, or he didn't come in the flesh, that they denied his deity, so to speak. And so he says, look, if that's the case, they are not from God. They are the Antichrist, okay? But listen to what he says next. You are from God, little children. You've overcome them, because greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. One of the things I want to focus on today is applying this passage of Scripture, plus one in Philippians, in order for you to have a sense of hope as you think and as we identify these various beliefs that are, as John would say, come from the Antichrist, or they're the spirit of the Antichrist, meaning they're anti-messianic, anti-Jesus. Because remember, Christ is a title, like king. It's not a name. It's not Jesus's last name. Jesus is the Christ. He is the Messiah. He is the king. So I want you to have a sense of a hope and optimism, because so often we talk about these things. We talk about how serious they are, how they need to be tested to see whether they're from God or not. We need to be discerning about them, and we need to analyze them you could start to get a little discouraged. Like, how do we fight against all this? And the world seems to be so enamored about that. Well, look at what he says, verse 5. They are from the world, and therefore they speak as from the world, and the world listens to them. So one of the things I think that we need to understand is that the world thinks like the world, and the world listens to these things because they are worldly in their orientation. In other words, they resonate with them. Truth often doesn't resonate with people. It has a tendency to aggravate them, sometimes annoy them, anger them. They don't like that. And so that's why it's very important. He says, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God or not. Now, some people would say, well, how do I test a spirit? It says, do I just ask people, that they confess that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh? No, it's a lot more than that. I had a guy that worked for me years ago, and he was recommended, and then he went through the interviews. He's very pleasant. And then as soon as he got here, he was working in our youth department. He had serious father abandonment issues, which came up in challenge to authority. So he started challenging authority. And he started saying all this kind of stuff. He was attacking me. He was saying things to the kids in the youth group. He reduced the youth group down to nothing. And oftentimes when you're in a larger church, or at least for me, it takes a while to figure out that this is happening. You don't see it immediately. And so that happened. And we ended up having to say, look, this isn't working out. You need to go. So he left, and he went to another church here in town. And these are the guys that actually recommended him to us, right? So he started working with them. And of course, when he got there, I was the problem, And what's so funny is he lasted there shorter than he worked for me. And all those guys that were his friends, they were his age, right? At this other church, they came back and they said, well, the problem wasn't you, Doug. The problem was him. And then he left. And long story short, about 2 years later, he writes me this big thing. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I was wrong, blah, 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 blah. And on a side note, this just seems to be the issue with young people is young people that, almost all the problems I ever had while I was in the ministry were from staff. And the first thing is that staff never come and talk to you about their problem. They talk to everybody else first. So you're usually last to know that they have a problem with you. And then the second thing they do is they misrepresent the problem and lie about it, and they attack you. And then all these people are pissed at you for stuff you didn't even do or say. And then you're trying to wade through that. And then the worst thing about it is they do all these things. They know they're sinful. They throw hand grenades and bombs. They hurt the church. They leave. And then they write me a note saying, I'm so sorry, forgive me. It's like, look, you did all this damage to all these people. I said, if you had any integrity, you get in your car, you drive back here, you call a meeting with all these people that you did all this damage with me in the room, and you would sit there and say, I beg for your forgiveness. What I did was sinful and wrong, and I asked Doug to forgive me. But none of these young people ever do that. No, they just blow things up, and then they run away to another church and do it all over again. It's really strange, but that's my mini rant for the day. What happens here is, notice what he says is the reason I brought that up. Let me kind of tie that back together. The reason I brought it up is because when he was attacking me and doing all this stuff, I said, look, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see where they are from God. So what then he did is he says, well, I confess that Jesus Christ came in the flesh, so I don't have to listen to you. And I wrote back, I said, okay, first and foremost, you're not applying that scripture biblically. He says that we are to test all the spirits. And the spirit that you have right now was a spirit of rebellion. And he rejected that because he believed I could do whatever I want to do simply because I confess that Jesus Christ came in the flesh. Like it was his trump card. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way. And that's not what John is saying. He goes down here over and over. He goes, we are from God. He who knows God listens to us. And I said, you're not listening to anything. You're just doing what you want. He who is not from God does not listen to us. And I said, this is the authority of the church. If you don't like it, that's fine. You have the freedom to go. But what you don't have is the right to attack it and to try to tear it apart. And yet that's what I had a lot of staff work for me over the 38 years that I was in the ministry. Lots and lots of staff. I'd say easily 50 or 60 different people. I would say 30, 40 of those people, awesome. They were great. They worked for me for years and years and years. And then they moved on. Oh, it's time for me. I'm going to take another job. I'm moving. I'm doing this. I'm called to a different ministry and so forth. They did a great, it was great. And then out of that 60 people, I had 20 that were like, man, these people were just horrible in what they did. And the damage they caused was unbelievable. And so I know now why that the average tenure of somebody who stays in the ministry is 12 years, because they just don't want to do it for very long. It's just, you have to deal with staff, and staff are the number one cause of conflict and problems in churches. And that's just the salty pastor truth, okay? Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because I want you to be able to have a sense of strength and encouragement in your own life, as even though there's all these ideologies that you should be aware of and take a stand against, okay? And we've kind of talked about those in the previous weeks, but I want to kind of read to you out of Philippians right now and just give you a little bit of understanding of how it works, okay? Verse 3, I thank God in all my remembrance of you. So every person that listens to Salty Pastor, every person that I got to minister to over the last 38, 39 years, I just thank God when I remember them. The people that came and went and were blessed, I just thank God for all the people that I was able to influence or see God influence through me. It was awesome. He says, I always offer prayer with joy in my every prayer for you all. I continue to pray for all of you. I pray for joy in your life, and I pray that you'll be able to experience more joy, not less. He says, joy comes in view of your participation in the gospel from the first day until now. Joy comes when you grow your faith and persevere and participate in the gospel. That's exactly what he's saying. He goes, I am confident of this very thing, that he who began a good work in you will perfect it till the day of Christ Jesus. So what does that mean? That means that as you participate in the gospel from the day of your salvation until your day of passing, God is working in you according to the gospel, okay? He's not there as your hype guy turning you into the person who wants to, fulfill whatever dream you might have. No, he's trying to align you more and more with him. You see, we are to align ourselves. We are being conformed to the image of Jesus Christ as we participate in the gospel. So Jesus is the author and perfecter of your faith. And that's what he's talking about. God started this, and it's a good work. He's going to do it until the day it is perfected, okay? He goes, now it's right for me to feel this way. It's right for me, he says, to feel joyful and happy and confident in you. Why? Because I have you in my heart. Since both in my imprisonment and the defense and confirmation of the gospel, you have all been partakers of grace with me. In other words, you partnered with me, you were alongside me, you encouraged me. He goes, as God is my witness, how I long for you all with the affection of Jesus Christ. And I pray this, that your love may abound still more and more in real knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve the things that are excellent, in order that to be sincere and blameless until the day of Christ, having been filled with the fruit of righteousness, which comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God. Look at that. He goes, I want you to be filled with the fruit of righteousness. So the reason we study these things and look at these things is because it produces in us a fruit of righteousness, right? A stronger and more mature faith. And this comes from Christ in your life. But guess what? How do you get more fruit? Well, because you approve of the things that are excellent, right? In order to be sincere and blameless. How do you approve of what's excellent? Where do you get the discernment to invest in the purest and most excellent things? Well, he says, I pray that your love may abound still more. So you grow in love. And people are like, yeah, man, Christianity's about love. We want to love each other. Jesus talks about love, and that's true, but not the 70s hippie bohemian love is love garbage. No, look at what he says. I pray that your love may abound still more and more in real knowledge and discernment. There you have it right there. Where does real love come from? Where does love that changes your life come from? Where does love that changes the lives of those that you love and other people out in the world? Well, the kind of love that grows in real knowledge and all discernment. Love is not a motivational emotion. Love is about real knowledge and all discernment. When you grow in real knowledge and discernment, guess what? You approve the things that are excellent. You get really, really good at discerning, right, between good and evil. Paul talks about this. It's called Pauline in the author of Hebrews. He's talking about, look, concerning God, concerning Jesus, we have a lot to teach you. We have a lot to say, but it's really hard to explain. It's really hard to explain. Why? Well, you kind of become dull of hearing. You just don't want to hear it. You don't want to, it's like, oh, it's too complicated. Whatever. He says, look, for though by this time you ought to be a teacher, you have need again for someone to teach you the elementary principles of the oracles of God, and you have to come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is not accustomed to the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to discern good and evil. You see, real love is about growing in real knowledge and discernment, right? And then here he says, solid food is for the mature, and you practice what you've learned, right? Maybe through discussion, dialogue, rhetoric, maybe even what we would call debates. What happens is you discern, you train your sense to know good and evil, right? And so how do you get there? Well, you don't do it by partaking only of milk. And this is what's really sad to me, is that the majority of what you hear coming from the pulpit on Sunday morning in churches in America is milk, right? It's just basic milk. Now, you could say, well, I go to a church where they go verse by verse by verse, and I go, okay, that's interesting because that's technically teaching, that's not preaching. And the New Testament does differentiate between those two things. But nonetheless, just because you're going verse by verse doesn't mean that you're getting a meatier message, that you're growing in your faith. Why? Because so many people treat those types of styles of preaching and teaching like a class. They take a notebook, they take notes, they're done, they fill in the blanks, they go home. But that's not the point. The point here in verse 14 says you have to practice it. You have to practice the meaty things in order to have your senses trained to know the difference between good and evil. So it's important to not just learn new, but you have to do the new. Does that make any sense? In order that your faith can grow. Your faith isn't going to go deep in 6 months. You're not going to whip yourself into shape and maturity that fast. But it is a long journey with God. And I just want to inspire you in that, because if we go back to, Philippians, I think it's wonderful where he says, look, I just have this deep affection for you and your joy. I get so joyful when I think of you all because your love is growing and your love is growing still more and more in real knowledge and all discernment. And he says, I'm confident of this thing, that he who began a good work in you will perfect it until the day of Jesus Christ. So that's really what I hope. And my desire is that you can continue to be a part of the Salty Pastor ecosystem. And my plan is to kind of bring a whole bunch of new things in the new year so that you can be encouraged in your faith, regardless of where you're at. And I just want you to know that sometimes I know I push the envelope on deeper things, but it's important that we stretch ourselves because it's not enough to just know what the scriptures teach. We have to know what they teach, but then we have to know what it means in our lives and how practicing it trains our senses to discern good from evil so that the world in which we live right now, America, we can continue to practice our faith in freedom. Because if we're not aware of what's happening in our nation today, if we're not aware of what's happening in Western civilization today, there won't be any Western civilization left. That's important to know. So this is Salty Pastor, just encouraging you in your faith, signing off today. And remember, what you believe is one of the most important things about you.